Hello and welcome. I'm your host, John Fontenot, and thank you for joining me this week for another lesson in product management. So today, I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation because I have Irene Yu, founder of Skiplevel, joining me to talk about how to become technical as a product manager and what does that even mean, right? Irene was formerly a developer at Amazon where she uncovered a pretty big problem that Skiplevel is helping to tackle today. This is Lessons in Product Management. Let's get started. Hey, Irene, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here. So before we jump in, could you give the audience an introduction of yourself and what you're up to today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO and founder of Skiplevel, where I help non-engineering professionals and teams become more technical so they can work better with dev teams and also just feel more confident in their technical chops. So before I went full-time on Skiplevel, I was a full stack software engineer at Amazon. I started out in the advertising org, and then I moved on to an internal tools team. And actually, I started my career in tech working at a lot of ad agencies, doing web design, web development, and creative work before I jumped into software development and now as a founder.
Awesome. So I guess what inspired you to leave Amazon as a full-time developer there to go build products for product people?
Yeah, that's a good way of asking that question. Well, it kind of happened very organically, actually. So when I used to work in the advertising org at Amazon, I was actually working on custom advertising solutions, which meant that I was working on more than just one product at any given time, right? Because there's many custom products, which also meant that I worked with a lot of product managers that our team often had meetings with. And after one of these product engineering meetings, the product manager had come to me afterwards, and she basically got really real with me, and she told me that she was struggling to understand what we were talking about in these talks, and that it was causing her a lot of anxiety. And so I ended up mentoring her for, I think it was 5 to 6 months, every 2 weeks. And I like to call this tech mentoring. And so what we would do is we would use technical documentation that the dev team wrote and kind of use it as a jump off point to help her learn more about the fundamentals of tech and software, and also about the product. And that entire mentoring experience was really eye-opening for me, because there were things that, to me and to most devs that are, it not necessarily basic or obvious, but just very common knowledge for us that I didn't realize, wasn't common knowledge to others who worked in the tech industry and work with dev teams, but are not engineers themselves. And so I realized it's not because this product manager was any less intelligent or any less capable than any of the devs, right? It was just that they didn't have a place to go in order to learn the tech and software concepts that made sense for their role. And the entire experience was so rewarding. I saw such a big difference in her and the way that she's able to ask much more well-informed questions during meetings, and just seeing her confidence was much higher. So I ended up training some more people, I think maybe another 10. And they were not just product managers, but they were copywriters, people in data, in sales, operations. And eventually during the pandemic, I decided it was the right time to leave Amazon and go full-time on Skiplevel.
That's awesome. So it kind of grew organically out of a problem. So you went from being a developer to, I would say, a product manager slash developer, identifying a market problem, which is a huge problem, right? Where
it is.
PMs talk all the time about like, how technical should I be? Do I need to learn how to code?
Yep.
I took like full stack Udemy courses trying to learn how to code, and hasn't helped me a ton. So
right.
In your experience, like what are some of the biggest misconceptions around like being technical as a product manager?
Yeah. That's such a great kind of like leading into that question, John, your experience with, coding. 100%. The biggest misconception is that in order to be technical, to become more technical, you have to learn how to code or know how to code. And that the only way to become more technical is to take a coding class. That is 100% not true. So here's an easy analogy that I like to use. So I like to compare saying a PM has to know how to code to saying you have to be a basketball player to know what a free throw is. That's obviously not true, right? You don't even need to know how to play basketball in order to be a referee. And as a referee, you're kind of like a super integral part of any basketball game, right? So this applies to product managers as well. You don't have to be a coder in order to be technical. So in reality, being technical and knowing how to code are two different things. And learning how to code is the least effective way to become more technical. So, knowing how to code is not the same as knowing how to build software, because there's so much more that goes into building software than just coding. But we only talk about coding. So just to name a few things: infrastructure, cloud computing, understanding how scaling works, knowing how to design data schema, architectural styles like monoliths and things like queues and job schedulers, and actually understanding the software development lifecycle, right? Those are all things that are not taught when you take a coding class. So in a coding class, you're really just learning the syntax of one specific programming language. Like, how do you assign a variable, right? And that's not really helpful for the product management role. So when a product manager is in a meeting with an engineer, no one is going to talk about how to write a for loop in Python, right? But engineers, they will talk about ways to re-architect their apps, from a monolith to a microservice. They'll talk about whether they want to use Docker to containerize their app and how long that might take. They might talk about the APIs that they're building. And so these are the things that are not coding and aren't taught in coding classes. In fact, so many new grads from dev boot camps, they graduate and they learned how to code, but they don't actually know how to speak tech or even understand technical trade-offs or learn what it actually takes to create maintainable, scalable, and great software, right? So long story short, being technical is not the same as knowing how to code, and taking a coding class is definitely the least effective way to become more technical.
So it sounds like you touched on some of them already, but I guess if somebody was listening and says, Irene, I am in that boat where I do not feel technically competent at all. Skiplevel sounds awesome. What are some of the things that Skiplevel addresses to help the PMs get into that technical competence to where they feel secure in their tech aptitude?
Yeah, such a good question. Very important question, and a more pragmatic question. So there's two parts to the answer to this question. The first part is we have to start by breaking down exactly what it means to be technical, right? A lot of people think that being technical is one skill. In reality, it's not one skill. It's actually composed of 4 different skills. The 4 different skills are: the first one is having an awareness of available technology. So what does that mean? It means having like a knowledge that even things like containers exist, that job schedulers exist, and then understanding what problems they solve and how do we use them and why do we use them, right? The second skill is having an understanding of technical trade-offs. There are so many ways to build a feature, build an app, and there's not a one-stop shop solution. Every solution is going to have its pros and cons, and based on the product, based on the requirement, one is maybe going to be slightly better than the other, or you're making trade-offs, right? So understanding what are those technical trade-offs: maintainability, scalability, fault tolerance, speed, right? Those are all the trade-offs that we have to think about when we think about how do we build software. The third skill is your ability to communicate technically. So, this one's more obvious to people. I should know the tech jargon and whatnot, but it's not just about speaking. It's about reading, comprehending, and, being able to comprehend things like diagrams, like architecture diagrams, right? And then the last skill is understanding the SDLC. So what is the process of building software? The process of planning, planning the software, all the way to shipping the software and maintaining the software. Right. So notice that none of these skills I just mentioned is actually coding. So coding is a separate skill itself. It is a skill that product managers can use to supplement the in-depth understanding of technology and maybe help visualize things a bit, but it's not what's going to make a PM technical. So those 4 skills that I just talked about is also what the Skiplevel program aims to improve in students. Like the second part of the answer to this question is that being technical is actually a spectrum. It's kind of like saying John and Amy are both really good cooks, but how exactly, but exactly how good of a cook are they? It's kind of hard to quantify that, right? So the same goes for being technical. It's actually on a spectrum. So the yardstick by which I tell people to use to measure how technical they are is how comfortable they feel with asking the right questions, aka asking well-informed questions. Product managers who are not technical will often ask questions that show that they lack a very basic understanding of how technology works, and they often feel a lot of imposter syndrome because of it. So the more technical a product manager is, they'll actually notice that they feel much more capable in being able to ask well-informed questions of their dev team. They don't get the sweaty palms and feeling afraid. They feel much more confident about it, right? So the ultimate goal for students that complete the Skiplevel course is not to be like a super senior architecture like engineer, right? Technology is evolving so quickly all the time. New tech is coming out all the time. There's no course you're ever going to take that's going to teach you everything. So the point of the course is to get the fundamental, the foundational technical knowledge that you need to ask more well-informed questions and be able to learn and comprehend new information that they get, right? So it's kind of like teaching someone how to fish.
Yeah. Makes total sense. So I can see PMs, because one of the anti-patterns of product managers is like thinking they tell the developers what to do, right?
Yeah.
I can see product managers taking this information and saying, okay, I'm technical now. I know what a job scheduler is. I know what a database schema is. So go do this thing this way. As a former / current developer yourself, what are some of the anti-patterns that you've seen that PM should avoid by, like, once they get this level of technical competency? How should they work well by using that information with their development counterparts?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few anti-patterns, but I will just touch on one that I would say, just from my own experience, I noticed as a behavior that alienates the engineering team. And that is having more of a push-pull friction mindset instead of we're one team collaboration mindset, right? So there's this common saying, if you will, that the product manager is the mini CEO, right? Which kind of makes it sound like the product manager has a lot more power than they actually do. But in reality, because product managers often are not the direct managers of engineering teams, right? PMs have to manage by influence. So what does that mean, managing by influence? It means building personal relationships, friendships even, and garnering respect such that it fosters that collaborative team mindset. And engineers are more willing to work with you, more willing to maybe prioritize that feature that you really, really want them to work on, right? And then there's active empathy. And part of active empathy is putting effort for both sides, PMs and devs, to care about each other's jobs and the considerations and difficulties of both roles. So one of the negative behaviors that I noticed with some PMs I've worked with is that the product manager does not put in an effort to learn about the work of the dev team and what it takes to build software. So I recall an instance where a product manager said to me, "I trust you, you're smarter than me." And I appreciate where he's coming from, right? Like, he wants to show his trust in his team. But in reality, it came off more like, I don't care what you're working on. I don't care to put effort into learning more. I'm not capable of it. And that doesn't build influence or respect or empathy, right? So coming from a good place, granted, but avoid saying something like what this PM said. Always project a helpfulness and empathy and a confidence, and being willing to learn more about the journey of the dev and ways to help them.
Okay. So Irene, we covered some of the anti-patterns that PM should avoid when working with developers with their newfound technical competencies. But looking more at the positive side of things, what are some things that product managers can do to make the lives of the developers that they work with easier or better?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I love hearing that question as a dev. So love the positive front. Well, I talked about managing with influence and respect and active empathy and having a more collaborative team mindset. So, we can break that down into more actionable behaviors. The first thing is that product managers have to remember that one of the biggest part of their function, their role, is to enable teams to build the product, right? So again, product managers have to remember that one of the biggest parts of their role is to enable teams to build the product. And because devs are, the last of the line, right? They actually build and they actually ship the product. So enabling engineering teams to do their best work is a key job of product managers. So here's a really amazing trick that will really get product managers that influence and respect, right? So you can say to a dev or your dev team verbatim, what's one thing I can do right now to make your job easier? That's a sweet everything to the ear of a dev. Like, oh my gosh, the devs are like drowning in work and backlog. And this PM just offered up their time and their energy to make my job easier, to enable me to do my work, right? So it immediately disarms them. It projects confidence that you feel that you do have what it takes to contribute to the team. And it really brings home that you don't just say you're there for the team, but you're actually going to do it. So what are some things that you can do to take work off the plate of devs, to allow them to work on the more crucial parts of your product and therefore ship faster? So for example, when I was on the internal dev team, the dev team was responsible for the ticket queue. And we were constantly having to field questions from people that used our software, which was basically every employee at Amazon. And so there were often tickets that really didn't require a dev's expertise or better processes that could be put in place for common tickets. So our PM at the time actually took ownership of a lot of the tickets. And they would do a first pass at the tickets and only assign a dev a ticket that they could not answer, that only a dev could answer, right? So that saved us a lot of time and headache. The PM also took over parts of documentation, which is an important part of the SDLC. Even doing small things like, the dev isn't getting proper, like good UX mocks from the designers. And we have to, keep on top of these people to, kind of get these assets and to make sure that they're good mocks. Instead, the PM would be the one to push with that team to say, the mocks need to be of this quality, that's also really helpful. And so those are all, some things that a PM can do to help enable the dev team to work faster and more efficiently. And that's a really, really effective trick for any product manager to help them.
Okay. So kind of trying to synthesize some of the things you said earlier about productive ways to use the information that you would get out of Skiplevel. There's two big things I picked up on, and correct me if I'm wrong, and then add to them if it's incomplete. But one of them is asking the right questions contextually, and then using the information you have to help and make like trade-offs whenever those decisions need to be made. Does that feel accurate, or were there some things that I missed there?
Yeah. So, when product managers are working with engineers, it's not a siloed relationship. The product requirements affect technical decisions as much as technical decisions affect product requirements. So being able to ask more well-informed questions is, an example would be if me as a PM, I say, I want this built in 3 months. That's the product timeline. And the engineers go and they do their scoping. They're like, no, I can't do this. It's going to take 6 months. What are your options as a PM to push back? If you're not, technical enough and you don't understand the process of software dev, then you're not really going to know, how to push back on that. And even then to be able to comprehend the answer that the devs give you. Right. But if you're able to ask well-informed questions, then you might be able to say, okay, well, can we break down exactly what's taking all this time? Like, are we writing unit tests? Are we writing integration tests? How much time is that taken? Okay, so it looks like you're spending all this time, creating these microservices. Is this actually necessary? Is this actually P0? Can we actually push this off to a later time? How much does that, save us? Being able to ask those sorts of well-informed questions are going to be really important for the role of the PM.
Gotcha. Awesome. So I know I'm going to enroll in Skiplevel because I probably need to improve my own technical chops, and I feel like there's a lot that I can learn from you. And so when we talked before, you talked about the value of a tech mentor, right? Which you were a tech mentor to 10, 11 people at Amazon, which is awesome. And so like after I finish Skip Level and want to continue engaging in learning, especially contextually to my situation and the dev teams that I work with in the particular product areas, I guess what would your advice be to myself and to other PMs listening in terms of going and finding a tech mentor that can help you continually hone and learn and grow along that competency level for technology?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And this tech mentorship is actually, it's called cross-functional mentorship. And it is one of my favorite tricks in the book for product managers to learn software fundamentals, to learn about their product, and to build a stronger, closer relationship with their dev team. So when we think about mentorship, we usually think of it as the same function mentorship. So PMs would typically get, someone who's also a PM as a mentor. But cross-functional mentorship is getting mentorship from another role. And this makes a lot of sense for the product management role, right? Because product managers are like the essential function that has to work with so many other teams, like UX, sales, marketing, devs. So doing cross-functional mentorship for product managers is going to be extremely helpful in order to become more technical and learn, tech fundamentals. So how it works is, first you have to identify one or two devs that you trust, who is knowledgeable, communicates well, and you set up recurring meetings with them. So I suggest 2 or more, because one dev might understand one part of the system better than the other. All devs have like different competencies. Some devs are better at the front end, some are better at the back end, and they have a different levels of tech understanding. So it's definitely a good idea to have 2 or more devs as tech mentors, and then using something as a discussion kickoff point during these sessions. So I like to use technical documentation that devs have already written, whether that's API documentation or like architecture documentation or like a diagram, which is awesome. And if there's anything that comes out of a technical meeting and the PM, jots that question down, like, oh, someone said something about this, virtual machine, and I didn't understand what that was, right? So bring that kind of stuff to the technical meeting, and you would do bi-weekly meetings with your tech mentor or whatever cadence really works for you. And I also suggest doing one-off meetings after technical meetings. And also as a PM, as you're in the planning phase, working on a new product or a new business requirement, right? So you would consult with your tech mentor one-on-one throughout that entire process of you coming up with the business requirements. So, doing cross-functional tech mentorship, it's such a neat little trick. It has only positive. There are no negatives. You not only increase your own knowledge, but you also get an advocate on the engineering team because you're building a relationship with them. So the other thing is, a lot of product managers tell me that they're scared to ask a stupid question during meetings, right? It's very common. First of all, there are no stupid questions, but there are ill-informed questions. That is the truth. So, having this personal tech mentorship and building relationship with a dev should be a safe space for you to ask all of the quote unquote stupid questions that you have, right, to this one person that you trust. Some product managers have mentioned to me that they feel a little scared to ask a dev for mentorship because, they don't want to feel like a burden, right? Don't feel that way, because devs love talking about technology and what they're building. They could talk about it all day long. So the more opportunity that they have to sound cool and talk about what they're working on, they're going to love it. So don't be afraid to ask devs for tech mentorship.
Yeah, that's great advice. Irene, I really appreciated all the advice that you've given here. I appreciate what you built with Skip Level. Again, I know I'm going to join it. I'm going to benefit from it. But if the listeners want to join or follow you or learn more about the details of Skip Level, where should they go to follow you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to having you and being a part of your technical literacy journey. That's so awesome. The quickest way to find out more about Skiplevel is to just go on the website, www.skiplevel.co. There's a program curriculum preview on the website, along with some preview videos, so people can kind of see the style in which I teach. There's also a monthly Skiplevel newsletter that I write, and you can subscribe to that on the website as well. I also have some free resources on technical knowledge on the website. There's also a couple places where you can reach me directly by either booking a call with me, or you can also click on the little thing on the bottom on the right side of the website to learn more, and then just send me a direct message with any questions. Of course, you can also find me on social media, Skiplevel. So on Twitter, the handle is just Skiplevel course. And if you do a search for Skiplevel on LinkedIn, then you'll find the page.
Okay, well, I'll make it really easy for the listener. I'll go find the links. If you're listening, scroll down to the bottom of the episode in the show notes, and you'll find all the links there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining, and I appreciate you coming on to share.
Yeah, it was a great time. Thanks, John.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube channel. If you're watching or if you're listening on the podcast, make sure that you rate and review and subscribe or follow if you haven't already. And thanks for joining me this week, and we'll see you next week for another lesson in product management.